Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we begin with our second segment, I do want to remind you yet again to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned. Also, they've been doing a fantastic job so far interacting with the show. Continue to do it through Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube. Anything is greatly appreciated. I love all the comments that we've been receiving over the past couple of weeks. So continue doing what you're doing, and this show will be even bigger and better. But without further ado, let us jump into our second segment of the day concerning the waiver wire. Now, the waiver wire is going to be weirder than ever right now because never have I seen the start of the season as Shep Easy's sweet spot comments. Baker's still out there in two of my leagues. He's a guy that I myself went out and picked up as well. Very astute observation because Baker, like I said before on this show, is someone who is going to be in that tier of quarterbacks who you know in the back of your mind has at least 50% of good performances throughout this season within him and can pretend to actually be someone who you can start week by week. And so Baker is definitely someone who I would definitely pick him on the waiver wire and did. So fantastic comment from Shep Easy Sweet Spot. But let's talk about some other guys, especially now that so many injuries. And I feel safe, as Tap to Learn says, Sammy D low-hanging fruit. That's another big one as well, because Darnold is also someone who will pretend to be out there as well in my league as well. But there's someone that we haven't mentioned just yet in that kind of tier of QB that I want to start off with, because QB is pretty easy because there are three big names, two that Shep Easy Sweet Spot and Tab to Learn alluded to that are out there, but this one, and I promise this isn't my bias coming in, is kind of going under the radar a little bit. So let's start off with Geno Smith. He had 17.88 fantasy points against New England, one of the leading passers, if not the leading passer, I believe, in the league this year. As Tap to Learn says, not Geno. I say that Geno might just be the best out of those options, in my humble opinion, if you really want to know. And it's not by bias. He's throwing the ball better than anybody. Yes, the O-line is a concern, but think about it. He has the weapons at his disposal, more than even Baker could have. He has DK, block him when he's healthy, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Both of them have big games, 100-yard games for that matter, against a defense that a lot of people were very high on after their upset win over Cincinnati. So Geno should not be underrated anymore. And going into a tougher slate of games, I got the Dolphins. As Sheppy's Sweet Sauce says, Geno's a gem. I agree. They're going up against a Dolphins team that might be a bit slower on offense. Their defense is kind of impressive, but I think that Seattle can take advantage of that situation. Then they have a prime-time game against the Lions, who they always play very tough. Last year, very exciting overtime game. And Geno's always going to be at the center of attention here. He's not even available in any of my leagues, says Sheppy's Sweet Spot. So maybe people are starting to become attuned to him, and I hope that they are. Because Baker and Darnold are fine and dandy. They're fantastic players. But when I think about them, and I think about what Seattle's offense could be once, Grubb's system is fully implemented, most importantly, Geno Smith could be a very dangerous fantasy option on waivers. But let's talk about another position here, wide receiver. Now, one of the notes I had here was the fact that you might have had to bench Justin Jefferson, and maybe you had to pick up someone off waivers, at least for this week, because I don't think the Jefferson injury is as serious as we initially thought. But right now, the wide receiver market is kind of barren. I just looked at it recently before the show. There's not much talent there. So the best thing I could potentially say to you about looking for wide receivers, hidden gems on the waiver wire, is just to follow the injury. Look at teams where star receivers have gone down. For example, not just the Vikings, but the Rams. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua out for extended periods of time. Tutu Atwell might become another one. Colby Parkinson, the tight end, might get a lot of targets. Even in terms of the running back room, Kyron Williams could get a lot more touches. He has had a slow start, so maybe, even though I don't necessarily like him as a fantasy running back, he can get a lot of targets as well. So it sounds kind of weird to say, but following injuries, as Tap to Learn says, Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is still out there, but after what I saw out of the Colts this weekend, maybe that was not the best of predictions, because Anthony Richardson did not look up to snuff in the red zone in that game against Green Bay. So we're going to have to tamp down on the Alec Pierce hype a little bit. But there is a name that I want to mention before we end this segment that will really be a shock to your systems if you're all watching. But yeah, the wide receiver and running back markets could become more intriguing as we get more updates on certain injuries, especially for teams that are contending or pretending to contend. And speaking of defenses, actually, because we talked about defenses a lot on this show, how about the Jacksonville Jaguars defense? Now, hear me out. The Jacksonville Jaguars defense is a sneaky pickup for many reasons. They're not the reason that Jacksonville is 0-2. It's all on the offense. The Jacksonville defense has been doing its job. Yes, they haven't faced the best of offenses, but against the Tua-led Miami Dolphins team, they did their job. The Dolphins didn't really have many big plays outside of the Tyreek Hill touchdown catch in that game. And against the Browns, yes, who knows what the Browns are on offense at this point, but they are getting the job consistently done. And against the Bills, it's going to be an interesting game. They might have more pressure on them than ever because the Bills are going to want to grind them down. But if they show that they're the best unit for Jacksonville, then they might be a sneaky addition on the waiver wire if you don't trust any of your other defenses. So while the defensive position isn't as important in fantasy, the Jags D could warrant a nice little pickup as a streaming option, a flex option, or just some defense to keep on your bench in the future. So look out for them. Let's get back to more of a team talk. Let's talk about Malik Willis, because we're going to talk about the situation a little bit more towards the end of the show. But Malik Willis, he's not going to put up big stats, right? And when I looked at his numbers in fantasy, they weren't impressive, really. He only had something around like 12 points. But he did get the job done. He didn't turn the ball over, most importantly. And this week, he's going up against his former team at their place. So look for Malik Willis to not put up eye-popping numbers, but in deeper leagues, he could be someone who you might look at and be like, hey, I could keep him around. Maybe if this injury says as Jawan Jennings or QJ, Quentin Johnson, I believe, says Johnny Pina. That's an interesting question. Because Quentin Johnston's in a situation where he doesn't have any injuries to worry about, you know. He's not immediately portrayed as the wide receiver one in that situation. But they are a run-heavy team. Whereas with Jawan Jennings, he is so vital to that 49ers team, even without all the injuries happening around him. He is someone who can be a reliable target for Brock Purdy and is just as important as, say, a Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. So I would say Jawan Jennings is an interesting pickup. But kudos to you for bringing up these two names, because these are two names that, when I say follow the injury, should immediately come to mind if you're thinking about what's transpired in terms of the injury crisis around the league. So that's a very astute observation from Johnny Pina. In terms of who I would pick, Jawan Jennings would be the pick. I think that this Quentin Johnston game proved that maybe he did warrant that first-round selection last year, but I'm not swayed by it until, you know, the Chargers have enough pass attempts where he can put up bigger numbers as well. But him being a nice red zone target could mean something down the road. But Jawan Jennings right now is in a more competent offense, has known the system for longer, and actually has been someone that can be relied upon for San Fran. So Jawan Jennings is my pick. Let's get back to Malik Willis, because in terms of Malik Willis as well, and Packers wide receivers too, that's kind of something you have to monitor as well, because I'm going to talk about the Love injury later in the show. As Splashball said, how long is Debo out? Well, they did say that he was expected to miss, as Johnny Penis says, thanks for the input. Always, my man. I love that you are commenting as well. I believe you're a new person commenting, so thank you for your input as well. Going back to the Debo question, I do believe they said he was going to be out for a couple of weeks. Didn't necessarily expand on that, but I would assume that they put him on the IR. It's going to be complicated because McCaffrey is already there, but we're going to have to see this situation pan out, because if, say, McCaffrey and Samuel project to be out for similar amounts of time, that could be very detrimental to this offense. So it's interesting, as Splash says, dang, it's my boy. Well, I think that you would have to go to the waiver wires there. But before I end this segment, I do want to give you guys a wacky, out there waiver wire option. Someone who you may not even consider. And this is just a name that I thought might interest people. How about, and I know this will sound very crazy, Andre Yoshivas. Let's give love to this young man out of Princeton, mind you. In that game against Kansas City, 2 catches only, I believe on only 5 targets for 7 yards, but both of those catches were red zone touchdowns. Now, yes, you can say, well, I think that this whole wide receiver situation in Cincy will finally pan out, but you gotta believe that if it doesn't, Andre Yoshivas will have a bigger role in the Cincy offense. And it's nice to know they have a red zone threat outside of just Jamar Chase, because there is still a cloud hanging over the Bengals' heads, I believe. I still think there's tension there. But if they can get, a wide receiver 3 in there as a contingency plan, and he can prove that he can have a long-term future on the team, I'm all for it. You might not want to go for him on the waiver wire, but just know that he could be someone who sneaks up on you. But let me know what you think in the comments. You've been doing a great job. But coming next, I give you my personal thoughts on the rankings based off of favorable matchups for Week 3 for all the QBs in the league. A lot of guys that we've already mentioned, and a lot of guys that pretend to have big games or I'm really holding out hope for. So you don't want to miss it. We'll be right back after this short break.